Well, welcome on behalf of the Stewartstown Area Historical Society Board of Directors. I'm Don Linebaugh. I'm the Vice President of the board, and it's great to have you all here this evening. So before I start on this program, can I see a show of hands? How many Hysons do we have here? Quite a few. So it's almost a Hyson family reunion. Close enough. Good. Well, hopefully you can add to some of what I have to say as we go along. So let's jump right into Cheaper by the Dozen Plus 2, the John Hyson House and Family. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the Hyson family landscape, the cultural landscape. Secondly, I'll talk about property owners with a particular focus on members of the John Hyson family, seen here. Then I'm going to talk about the evolution of the house itself, two parts. The main block dates pre-1850, and then an addition on the back dates to about 1859. And then finally, I'm going to, at the end, throw out some ideas about Archibald Hyson, carpenter, as builder of this particular house and why I think that might be the case. So first, the Hyson family cultural landscape. And just to put this in context, what a cultural landscape is, it's thinking about the totality of the landscape. So it's not just the house, but it's the landscape around it, the outbuildings, the roads that connect it, even the stream that powered Hyson's mill, right? So if we kind of go through this little area that we might also call Hysonville, we've got the Archibald Hyson House, 1803, probably redone by Archibald in the 1850s. We've got, of course, the John Hyson House that I'll be talking about today, or circa 1850. We've got the Hyson Mill, built about 1854, and the Miller's House, again built by Archibald Hyson. We've got the Robert and William Hyson House. I don't have a historic photo of this, but it's also clearly pre-1860 because it shows up on the 1860 Shearer map. Then we have the first Hyson School, the Stone School, 1857. We've got the Robert Hyson House, about 1870, just up the road from the schools. And then finally, the second Hyson School, so 1892. So we really run almost the entire 19th century that encompasses this cultural landscape of the Hyson family. And here's the 1860 Shearer map that shows that area, starting with the grist mill at the top all the way down to the John Hyson House at the bottom of the map. And it stays almost the same from the 16 years between the 1860 map and the 1876 map. So this is the sort of landscape around the John Hyson House. But if we think about the fact that, of course, the family had how many kids? 14, right? They all then went out, and so the Hyson landscape, cultural landscape, begins to expand, right? It expands out across York County, and in fact, it actually expands out across the country as Pleasant goes to Omaha, Alice goes to New Mexico, Archibald goes down to Texas, etc. So that real expansion there. And one dot there that doesn't have a name is Chicago. And I just, thanks to Suzanne, I came across a photo today, this photo of Alice and John and Emma Wilson, Emma Hyson Wilson, and then Archibald, Bertha, and David in the back. And it's taken in Chicago, and it's dated September of 1893. What were they doing in Chicago in 1893? They were at the Columbian World Exhibition. Thank you very much. So another sense that this family really moved across the landscape. So I want to focus down onto the property owners of the John Hyson House itself. And I'm going to start here in the middle with the deed from the estate of John Hyson to Payne Manifold in 1911. that's actually the earliest deed we have for the property, unfortunately. It turns out, though, that that deed says that John Hyson acquired the same 143 acres from 4 transactions. One large transaction from Archibald Hyson, which I'm pretty sure was his brother, and then 3 smaller transactions from Jane Hyson, who would have been his mother, right? That actually then made up the 143 acres. So unfortunately, we don't have those early deeds. We do have, this is a 1910 newspaper article that refers to the farm, right? This farm, one of the largest and best cultivated in East Hopewell. It's been in the Hyson family for over 100 years as of 1910. So that means that's driving us back to 1810, right? And it was owned by Archie Hyson, who served in the Revolutionary War and later divided it among his sons. And in fact, Archie would be John Hyson's grandfather, right? He divided the property among his sons, so Robert Hyson, who was John's father. So kind of connects it back to Archibald the First, if you will, right? The other thing we have is this early land patent, and this is dated 1768, and it's for a parcel that's labeled as Green Valley. Does anybody know what the Marsteller family calls their farm to this very day?
Green Valley Farm.
Green Valley Farms, right? And when we take the manifold deed and superimpose it over that early tract, you'll see that it follows very nicely in this, particularly in this area. So I think we are absolutely in the right location, and we just need to do a little bit more work to kind of push it back a little bit farther. So John's parents, Robert Hyson, who again was the son of Archibald, marries Jane Bortner Hyson in 1819, excuse me? Oh, okay. And they have 3 kids. John Hyson is the first, 1820, Archibald the builder, 1824, and then Robert R. Hyson, 1826, who lives just up from the John Hyson house. There's John in an early studio photo, I think holding his Bible in his left hand. And here is his wife, Margaret Miller Hyson, right? And of course, they then get married in 1848, and within 25 years, produce 14 children, right? So there's our dozen plus 2 at the end. And I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail. But this is one of my favorite shots of the family. This is 1866. And Margaret has on her lap the newest member of the family, number 11. I think they called her Clara rather than number 11. And so by 1866, they're married in 48. By 66, they've got 11 kids living in the John Hyson house. So let's go through in 5 minutes. We're going to do 14 kids, okay? Here we go. So number 1, Jane Ann Hyson. She eventually married Harvey Anderson and had a farm in the Stewartstown area. Number 2, Dr. John Hyson, who was a physician in Red Lion, but he was also a big investor and involved in cigar making. Tobacco and cigar making, which is going to come back around here in a couple of minutes. Number 3, Elizabeth Lizzie Hyson. She married Clinton Johnson, and they had a farm south of Stewartstown. Number 4, Robert Bortner Hyson, who first had a store in Gatchellville, and then later in Bridgeton, where he had a canning house, a creamery, and was quite involved in the community. Number 5, Sarah Martha Sally Hyson. They all have nicknames. She married Daniel Brenneman, and they had a farm in the Crossroads area. So I think you're seeing a pattern of the Hyson women are marrying up to this point and moving on to farms. Number 6, Archibald Free Hyson worked in the laundry business. He had several companies, one in Texas, did business in St. Louis, and also in Maryland, okay? And this is a wonderful photo, the 3 Archibald Hysons. So Archibald Free Hyson is actually on the left, and Archibald the Builder, this is just 4 years before he passed, is on the right, and this is at Devil's Den in Gettysburg. Number 7, David Hyson, was a rural mail carrier in the Stewartstown area, and then he actually later was a store merchant, and the store that he ran was where Trout's store eventually was located, so right on the corner in the square. Number 8, Mary Catherine Alice Hyson, who was a school teacher and a mission school teacher in Rancho de Taos, New Mexico. Here's a picture of her standing in front of the John Hyson Memorial Presbyterian Mission in Taos. So a wonderful shot. Number 9, Cordelia, or Cordy, was also a school teacher, married a little later in life, and she married a math professor, and they moved to Ohio, where he was teaching at one of the state normal schools. Here they are with their first child, John Hyson Fairchild. Number 10, Emma Hyson married John Wilson, and they had a farm and a farmhouse on Blue Ball Road. You can see the farmhouse here. Number 11, we already spoke about Clara. She was also a teacher. Unfortunately, while she was doing additional education at Millersville, she came down with appendicitis and was brought back to York County and died shortly thereafter. So she was the first of the 14 to die. Number 12, Gertrude Hyson, married farmer John Hoover, and they actually settled on a farm outside of Dallastown. Number 13, Pleasant Hyson, moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where he was really a major player in the development of the cold storage business. And last but not least, Bertha Hyson married Payne Manifold, and they then purchased the John Hyson house in 1911 and continued living there until Bertha sold it to the Marsteller family in 1960. Okay, so that's the whole crew. This is the Hyson manifolds at the house. And of course, another important part about this is all of those kids went to the Hyson school. They all went through school at this amazing little brick school, and we recently found the teacher's attendance record for the Hyson school, and it's a little hard to read here, but there's a Hyson, there's a Hyson, there's a Hyson, there's a Hyson, Hyson. So there's a lot of Hysons on this. So they all went to this school. The other rather extraordinary thing, and I love this photo, 1888, taken in York. The other extraordinary thing is they all lived to adulthood, which was super unusual in the second half of the 19th century, that they didn't have some children who died young. So they came together in 1888 and said, hey, we're all still here. We need to go into York and get a fancy photograph. So sure enough, they went into York. And it was such an event that the York paper, the York Daily, published an article, right? A family of 16 photographed, right? This unusually large number of children in one family. And then they end by saying that the parents are remarkably well-preserved people. There you have it, right? Straight from the journalist, right? This is important. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear to you that John and Margaret were pretty good at producing kids, right? it turns out they were also pretty good at producing farm products as farmers. They were very successful farmers. And if we look at the 1850 agricultural census, which lists each farm in that period, we see that John and Margaret had 65 acres. Their farm was valued about $1,000. They had a few livestock, a few horses, milk cows. This is pretty typical. A small number of sheep. Their crops were all in the 10 to 30 bushel range. Wheat, rye, Indian corn, again, pretty typical. And they were just starting to get into producing market products that they could sell beyond the farm. So wool, potatoes, buckwheat, 20 tons of hay, pretty significant amount. And it turns out that agricultural historian Sally McMurray, who has written the context about agriculture in York County, she places the Hyson farm in what she calls the second period of agricultural development, which is small farms, mechanization, and new markets, right? She says, the farm size declined significantly during this period, but the cultivated acreage increased, okay? We're going to see a couple of these things with the Hyson farm. The new markets stimulated a new farm system so that we now have cash crops and livestock raising. Mechanization took off. Of course, York became one of the headquarters for farm equipment. So it was really a mix of cash, home product, and barter during this period. Tobacco became super important in York County because of the cigar industry. And then finally, I can't neglect talking about this, is the vegetable and fruit canning industry took off at the end of that period, right? So now let's go and look 30 years later. Here's the agricultural census for the Hyson farm. They're now tilling 75 acres, so they're tilling more land. But look at the value of the farm in 30 years. Remember, it was $1,000 in 1850. It's $8,000 in 1880. They've added significantly to their livestock. They now have lambs and sheep that they're selling. They've got a big increase in pigs. They've added poultry. Their crops are now in the hundreds of bushels in terms of production. And most importantly, their market products have really expanded. So 42 pounds of wool, 100 gallons of milk, 250 pounds of butter, 500 dozen eggs that they're selling, 700 bushels of potatoes, and importantly, 3,383 pounds of tobacco produced, right? Where do you think he's selling that tobacco? In Redline, and he might be selling it to his son, John Miller, or to one of John's companies, okay? Okay, so that sets the context of the family, the farm, and its production, and I want to talk now about the house itself and the evolution of the house, right? This is the earliest picture we have. This is 1890, and it shows what is likely the original part of the house in the front, and then a rear L. This is John and Margaret sitting in the chairs, and then Clara, Bertha, and Gertrude standing behind. So that's 1890. Here's what the farm looked like when I got there. It was underway of being taken apart. They had hired an Amish crew to take the house apart. They gave me permission to go in and photograph and to draw the house, but they didn't stop the Amish workers. So they were literally tearing the house down around me as I was photographing and drawing. They were very respectful, but they had a job to do. And so we got along pretty well. Here's just another shot of the side. There's one of the workers taking apart the chimney. But what really was important was, as they took it apart and peeled it back, it was almost like the archaeology of a building, right? So we could start to see the inner works, the frame of the building as they pulled the siding off. And that allowed me then to figure out the evolution, the way the building was constructed and put together. This is looking at the side, and right here is the division between the original house and then the addition that got added about 10 years later. And we'll look at that in a little more detail in just a minute. So again, we were just looking at this spot right here. So we've got the pre-1850 original house, and then we've got the 1859 L in the back. And what you're seeing here is what the floor plan was when the Marsteller family was still in the house and using the house. So they had moved the kitchen up to the front, living room in the back wing. They had a dining room and office and an entryway on the side. And then upstairs, they had expanded a bedroom, so they basically had 5 bedrooms and a bath upstairs. So let's focus in just on the early part of the house right here. And take note that the front door at this point, there are 1, 2, 3 windows, and the front door is right in the middle, right? Okay. So when we started looking at the framing, you could see the framing that showed that, in fact, there was a door in the center and windows on either side, even though this was the door during the Marsteller period on the side, okay? So if you have a center entry, right, what did the inside look like? Unfortunately, it was so torn up by the time I got there, I couldn't really figure it out that well. But what I was able to do is say 1850s, what kind of a house layout would be typical, right? One is a center passage, which makes sense. The door is in the center, right? And a stair with a probably living room and parlor, and then kitchen and dining room kind of layout. That's one option. Another option might be a more open plan where the door just came into the living room, maybe with a little winder stair, still with a parlor, a little more private space, and then a kitchen and dining room. Something like that is my best guess based on what we know. Upstairs, we know for sure it was 4 bedrooms, right? So absolutely 4 bedrooms on the second floor. Construction of this building. Well, some really good clues. So what you're seeing here is what's called a pole rafter. So it's essentially just a log. And it still, if you can see down here, has its bark on it, right? Whoop. Let's go back. Still has the bark on it. And these are basically just round logs. All they did was finish the ends where they were nailed onto the frame of the building, okay? And they were nailed on with what we call mature cut nails. Those are dated to about 1830 to 1850. So that's another kind of dating clue. These are the posts which are part of the frame, and it was a really heavy, well-built frame that put this house together. And I'm going to kind of close in on this spot right here, and this is what you're seeing. That's the top of that. And these are 2 tenons, so it was a very well-constructed mortise and tenon frame clearly by a very competent builder. All of the members of the frame were hand-hewn, so they weren't sawn. They were done with a froe, which is what you're seeing that gentleman use right there, including this big timber right in the middle. And that big timber is called a summer beam. And the summer beam, that beam is 29 feet long, one single piece of wood, and it stretches across the center of the house. And then it supports the floor joists, which of course then support the individual floor boards. And that's what you're seeing here. They also give us a good idea that this was a pretty high and accomplished builder. And why is that? What you're seeing here is these marks right here. That's called undercutting. So that's the bottom of the floorboard. And so at every time the floorboard crossed a joist, the builder would carve away just enough wood so that the floor was perfectly level. So on some, if the joist was a little higher, they had to carve a little more away or a little less away. So an incredibly time-consuming way to put a floor down, but one that produces an amazing level floor. And we're also seeing, again, these mature cut nails. Finally, the other piece of evidence, can you see those striations in the wood that is showing there? So right here we see them as well. Those are saw marks, and those are from a saw called a sash saw. And that's a saw that goes straight up and down. So as the board goes through, it creates these nice parallel lines. Why is that important? Well, sash saws are used up until about 1850. And in this area about 1850, the next kind of saw is a circular saw. And that leaves a very curved mark on the board, right? So this clearly places us in the pre-1850 period again. Has a very heavy chimney made out of stone and brick, and that is a 14 by 14 inch white oak mantle that stretches across the front of the fireplace. It's pretty incredible. Okay, so that's that early part of the house. The addition, right? How do we know about the addition? Well, John Hyson paid taxes. This is news to everybody, right? Okay. He started paying taxes in about 1852 on property. So I'm assuming that's about when he started living in that old house, which I think was already there when he and Margaret moved in, okay? Then what we look for is, where does the value per acre jump up all of a sudden, right? Well, it jumps up right here between 1858 and 1859. It goes from $3.50 an acre, because the 72 acres is where the building was. It goes from, sorry about that, from $3.50 to $5. That's a 42% increase in value, right? That means that something significant was added to the landscape, right? So I'm pretty sure that is the point at which the addition gets built. And I'm going to then tie that into the chronology. What's happening in the family in 1858, 1859? Well, guess what? We're up to 7 kids, okay? In fact, Margaret has just given birth to 2 in the same year, right? Archibald Free and David, both born in 1857. One hopes really early and really late, okay? And Alice is on the way in 1861, right? So, you know, you can speculate about a lot of things, but I'm thinking Margaret said, you're not getting close to me until you build an addition onto this house, because we right now have 9 people living in 4 bedrooms, and we need more space, okay? So I'm just speculating, Okay, so they add this addition on the back, and it adds a big kitchen, right? Which then makes more room in the front part of the house. Probably a bedroom in the back corner on the first floor, and a pantry. And then on the second floor, this is what's important, right? 2 new bedrooms, and I'm guessing that room that was a bath later on may have been something like a nursery. And man, these people need a nursery, right? So I think that's a possibility there. So we're going to look again at that connection on the side of the house right here. It turns out that we have 2 different framing types in this. So again, old house on the right, new addition on the left. what we have is German framing versus English framing. And how do we know that? Well, we have a brace that goes on a diagonal all the way from the plate down to the sill, okay? But on the other one, all of the braces are short corner braces, which is very typical of English framing, whereas this long brace is very typical of German framing. Look at the front of the Gates and Plow Tavern, and you'll see these diagonal braces on the Golden Plow Tavern, okay? The other thing is, here's right at our division, I'm going to show you this joint again, and that joint is our friend again. So where we're bringing three different pieces together as one. So we've got the post, and we've got a plate running in two different directions, and it's all connecting right in there, okay? That's the old one. If we look at the new frame, what we see is instead of integrating all three with a very fancy joint, they basically just stacked one on top of here and one on top of there. So a much simpler framing system in this new edition. The other thing is, notice the size difference, right? Much heavier early frame and a much lighter frame. And in fact, throughout the 19th century, as we moved toward balloon framing, which is how we build houses today, the frames got smaller and smaller and smaller. So it fits very nicely in the chronology of building and how we understand building. Finally, the addition has sawn rafters. It doesn't have those early pole rafters that we looked at in the other building, okay? So I'm pretty comfortable with that 1859 date for the addition of that building and making Margaret a much happier householder, right? The next owners then are Payne and Bertha Manifold, and thanks to Ann Wenrick, where is Ann? There she is. Thanks to her, I was able to sit down with the plan, and she remembers being in the house and was able to actually label the rooms for us, right? So we've got the entry hall, we've got the entry hall, living room, sitting room, kitchen, still a bedroom, and that was for the hired man who was named Ben, correct? Yes, okay. Pantry off the kitchen, and then a washroom, a little washroom here, which was for when people came in off the farm to just get cleaned up, and a wash house, which was actually for doing laundry and the like, and then a woodshed behind it, okay? And this is the first floor of the house. And again, remember, currently the house has an entrance on the right side. It no longer has an entrance in the middle. I'm pretty sure that entrance got moved early in the ownership of Payne and Bertha Manifold. It pretty certainly wasn't done by John, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So here's a picture during the Manifolds' use of the house, and there's that door moved from the middle over to the side, and notice that there's a full wraparound porch that's been added to the house at this point. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to do the tax work to see exactly when this occurred, but if we go back to that 1890 photograph, right, where we have the door in the center and so forth. So this is 1890. John dies in 1892. I'm pretty sure in his last couple of years he didn't make that major change inside the house. And I'm guessing that the widow, Margaret, and her daughters who were living with her didn't make that change either. It really makes a lot more sense to think it's the new people coming in, it's Payne and Bertha kind of changing the house up because they're establishing their own family, okay? There's Bertha on her birthday in 1956, and what I wanted to show you here was that's that woodshed and wash house at the back. It's the only photo we have of it. Okay, and the second floor, for Payne and Bertha still had 6 bedrooms. Almost certainly by this time, that little room is a bathroom. I think there's little question about that. And they just have 1 child. So they got a lot of room, and that's why grandchildren like Ann and others were able to come over and hang with Payne and Bertha. We don't have a lot of photographs of the farm during its operation. This is actually a wonderful landscape showing the sort of greater Hyson vicinity, if you will, in the 1940s with the Hyson farm right in the middle. And we have a couple of wonderful photos from Ann's period. So this is Ann's mom and Ann, and that's Ben, the hired man back there behind, back when we used to get snow. We might get some this year. Here's some of the farm buildings. Kind of interesting to be able to see some of those. And then here's Ann with her pig, Porky, in 1949. Did you know I was going to use that one, Ann?
No,
It's a wonderful shot, and it also just gives you a sense of the farmyard, the barnyard there. Okay, so that's the evolution of the house. Why do I think it was built by Archibald Hyson? Remember who Archibald is, right? He's John's brother, okay? And he's been a builder. He had gone down to Baltimore, and he had been working as an apprentice, came back up to this area, and just started building like nobody's business, okay? So why? There he is again, Archibald the builder. So here's a picture of the John Hyson family in front of the house, right? And I want you to look closely at that porch. I'm going to focus in a little bit more. And what we're going to look at is this right here. That's actually an architectural shape, and it's called an ogee arch, okay? Basically, an ogee arch is 2 back-to-back S's laid on their side, right? So it's a very distinctive shape, and one that architects were familiar with, certainly. So why, if I see that on this house, do I think Archibald might have built it? Because I've seen it elsewhere. I've seen it in my living room. This is our house, which was the Adam H. Trout House, which we know was built by Archibald Hyson in 1862. And where is the ogee arch? Right there on the decoration of the door. So we see it very clearly there, right? This is Glenn and Mary Sue Shaw's house, right? The Yost Shaw farmhouse. Again, I'm going to zoom in, and it's a little hard to see because it's an old photo, but there's our ogee arch, right? And we know, based on documentation, that Archibald built this house in 1860, okay? And we don't see that pattern in looking at other buildings in the area. I have not seen it on other houses that we don't think has a relationship to Archibald. The other reason I think it might have been Archibald is a particular sort of overall design that he uses, and that's what we call a front gable. And almost all of the buildings that we know of his have this front gable with a front gable window. Often sort of a Greek revival shape. This is the Robert Hyson house, that's the Miller's house. Again, here's that front gable with a nice Greek lancet-shaped, or nice Gothic lancet-shaped window. And then here's Archibald's own house with exactly the same window in that front gable. So I think this front gable is something that Archibald's, and it's, I mean, we see it in other places and other houses. But again, it seems to be a pattern, and that's how we begin to connect these things. So this is actually by way of a very cheap ploy to plug my next lecture, which is going to be on Archibald Hyson. and the houses of Archibald Hyson in the area. So we'll continue that at some point when I get all that research done. But that really brings us to the end. I want to thank Ann Wenrick, Bertha's granddaughter, for her help and the wonderful photos that she provided. I want to thank Roger, wherever he is, and also Doug for their help with photos and research. And finally, to my wife in the back row, Suzanne, for her help in doing the research on taxes and deeds up at the York County Archives. And with that, I'll stop and open it up for questions. Thank you.